It all started on a quiet Saturday afternoon. My wife had just pulled into our driveway when two men in security-style uniforms approached her car. They looked official, badges, radios, the whole get-up, claiming they were with the neighborhood HOA enforcement team. But something felt off. They weren't polite, they weren't professional, and within seconds, they were shouting, demanding ID, accusing her of trespassing, in our own driveway. And then one of them did something unthinkable. He reached for something on his hip and flashed what looked like a weapon. My wife, calm as ever, didn't panic. She didn't cry. She didn't back down. And that's when they really started pushing her, trying to intimidate her. What these fake cops didn't know: her dad's no ordinary guy. He trains elite military, Delta Force. Yeah, **, Delta Force. She's grown up around warriors, trained for high-pressure moments, and knew exactly how to handle the situation without ever escalating it. This wasn't just some case of mistaken identity or an overzealous HOA. Something darker was going on, and they picked the wrong woman to mess with. What happened next flipped the entire situation on its head and brought real law enforcement into the picture. Stick around, because the truth behind who these men really were will leave you speechless. So here's where things start getting really strange. After the two guys backed off a little, probably realizing my wife wasn't scared, they started changing their story. First, they said they were from the HOA. Then suddenly, it was private community enforcement. No IDs, no paperwork, nothing that made them legit. But they kept trying to control the situation, talking over her, trying to sound like they had authority. It was like they were trying to gaslight her into thinking she'd done something wrong. Our neighborhood has an HOA, sure, but they don't send people around like that, especially not armed, and definitely not without warning. My wife knew something was off. She stayed calm, kept her voice steady, and casually mentioned that her dad was coming by soon, just dropped it like it was no big deal. What she didn't say was that her dad had trained some of the most elite soldiers in the world. He's seen situations like this before, and let's just say, he doesn't take kindly to people trying to scare his family. But the fake cops didn't leave. One of them started circling the car, peering in like he was searching for something. The other stood his ground, hand near his belt, eyes locked on her. What were they really after? And why her, of all people? As the minutes ticked by, the tension kept rising. My wife stayed in the driver's seat, one hand resting on her phone just in case. Meanwhile, these so-called HOA security officers kept pressing her with vague accusations that she was violating neighborhood rules, that there had been complaints about her vehicle, even suggesting she was parked illegally on our own property. It didn't make any sense. The story kept changing, like they were fishing for a reason to be there. What they didn't realize was that a neighbor across the street had been watching the whole time. She knows us well, and when she saw the way they were acting, too aggressive, too confrontational, she quietly started recording from her porch. Later, she told us their body language reminded her of people trying to scare someone into making a mistake. My wife began asking simple questions. Who's your supervisor? What's the HOA president's name? They had no answers, just more attitude. But here's where it gets even weirder. One of them said, almost under his breath, "We've dealt with your kind before." What did that even mean? Was this personal, random, or part of something bigger? At that moment, my father-in-law's car turned the corner and rolled up slowly. The energy shifted. They noticed. And for the first time, they looked nervous. As my father-in-law's car pulled into the driveway, the air shifted. You could almost feel it, the heaviness of something about to snap. The two fake cops froze, eyes flicking to the car, then back to my wife, and for the first time, their cocky demeanor faltered. The one closest to her started shifting nervously from foot to foot, like he wasn't sure if he should stay or run. The other just stood there, eyes darting around, trying to figure out his next move. They weren't acting like authorities anymore. They were acting like they'd just realized they'd bitten off more than they could chew. My father-in-law stepped out of his car, slow and deliberate. He's not a huge man, but there's something about him. A quiet intensity. He's been through things that most people will never see. As he walked toward us, the fake cops tightened their grip on their radios, their fingers hovering over what looked like stun guns, or maybe something worse. My wife's face was calm, but I could see the way her body was coiling, waiting. The situation was about to blow wide open. One of the men took a step forward, his hand resting on his weapon, trying to assert control. But my father-in-law didn't flinch. He was calculating, measuring. When he spoke, it was with a voice that cut through the tension like a knife. "I don't think you want to escalate this any further." And that's when everything changed. The man with the gun hesitated, and in that moment, my father-in-law's presence alone was enough to make them second-guess every decision they'd made up until then. Just as my father-in-law's words hung in the air, the tension was so thick you could almost taste it. The two men exchanged a brief, silent glance. Something passed between them, like a signal, and before we could even process it, the situation took a turn none of us saw coming. Without warning, the man who'd been hovering near the car pulled out his weapon. It wasn't a stun gun like we'd thought. It was a real gun. My heart slammed in my chest. The sound of it felt like it echoed for miles. But before anyone could react, there was a sharp, commanding voice from behind us. "Drop the weapon." The moment the voice cut through the air, everyone froze. My father-in-law didn't flinch, but the fake cops did. They spun around, confused, searching for the source of the command. From the shadow of our neighbor's house, a third figure emerged. A man in tactical gear, the kind of gear that's meant to intimidate, but it wasn't just any guy. This was someone who knew what he was doing. He moved with precision, his every step deliberate, calculated, and the fake cops, now completely off balance, was struggling to figure out if they were in control or if they'd just walked into something way bigger than they ever imagined. The new guy didn't waste time. "You've been warned," he said, his voice cold and steady, like he was giving an order to a child. The fake cops started backing up, eyes wide, their hands still hovering over their guns. This wasn't about enforcing neighborhood rules anymore. This was something much more dangerous. And just like that, we realized, whoever these people were, they weren't here by accident. The man in tactical gear took another step forward, and the fake cops stumbled backward, still unsure whether they should make a run for it or stand their ground. The one with the gun started to mumble something, but the man in tactical gear silenced him with a sharp hand gesture. "I don't care what your plan was. You're not leaving here like this," he said, his voice low, but full of authority. It felt like the world was holding its breath. My father-in-law stood steady, his eyes locked on the men in front of him. There was no fear in him, only the calm that comes with knowing exactly how far you're willing to go. He took one more step, and the two men looked like they might snap. The tension between them was so thick, you could almost feel it crackle in the air. But before anyone could make another move, something unexpected happened. The man in tactical gear shifted his stance, and with a quick, deliberate motion, he yanked his helmet off, revealing a familiar face. It was a face I never thought I'd see again. My wife's brother, the one who had disappeared years ago, the one who'd gone off the grid, supposedly joining some secret military program. He looked older, more hardened, but it was undeniably him. The fake cops froze, their hands still hovering over their weapons. The entire situation took a sharp turn. The man, my brother-in-law, didn't look at them. His gaze stayed on my father-in-law. "We had to test them," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the scene. "We had to make sure they weren't connected to something bigger." The two fake cops, now realizing they were caught, quickly dropped their weapons. The man who had been holding the gun looked like he wanted to argue, but my brother-in-law silenced him with a single piercing look. "You're done." As they were escorted away, the rest of us stood in stunned silence. We still didn't fully understand what had just happened, who was behind this, and why they'd come after us. But we did know one thing for sure: the threat wasn't over. Something deeper was at play, and we were just beginning to scratch the surface of what was really going on. And in the distance, something told me this was far from the last time we'd cross paths with these people. As the dust settled and the fake cops were driven away, we all stood there, processing what had just unfolded. My brother-in-law, the one we thought was lost, explained everything. He had been undercover, infiltrating a shadowy organization that was using HOA fronts to manipulate neighborhoods, gather intel, and run illicit operations. The so-called security team had been part of that operation, sent to test us, to see how far they could push before we fought back.